Hey, been looking at Ezekiel 38 and 39 for the past couple days. Tough stuff here to figure out. This guy, Mr. Gog from the land of Magog, what tough stuff there. Just a couple of observations to get started. Ezekiel speaks to a prince or a leader who's not yet born. And he speaks like 2,600 plus years into the future. And he tells this guy first what he's going to do, second, why he's going to do it. And he even goes so far as to quote this prince, saying what is in the thoughts of his mind and what comes out in the words of his mouth. Again, 2,600 plus years into the future. This entity, Gog, is going to be irresistibly compelled by God to attack Israel. That's tough stuff right there. That is a bit of meaty theology. This is what we would probably call a vessel of wrath, prepared for destruction. Again, tough theology there. But at the same time, we've been over some of these tough texts of Scripture. We've seen Romans 1, where man decides to go a certain way that slaps the grace of God in his face, slaps the grace of God in the face, so God withdraws his hand. And when God repeatedly withdraws his hand, it is not pretty. Man does not go to a good place. Gog, this guy is going to be, it says in Ezekiel 34, I will turn you about, put a hook in your jaw, you and all of the nations with you, and you will be summoned. So there are times when God impels men or nations to go in an evil direction. If they've already made a decision to do evil, God, in fact, pushes them to go in that direction. Difficult stuff. We've seen it in Jeremiah chapter 27, where false prophets and the ministers of the occult were there with Israel to impel them to walk in footsteps that lead to the wrath of God. Isaiah chapter 18, we haven't been over that, but it's another example. Also, 2 Thessalonians 2, where people have rejected the truth, took pleasure in wickedness, and God said he will send upon them a deluding influence so that they might believe what is false. So we can't be too surprised to see something like this, where God impels people to walk in a direction that will provoke his wrath. And it looks like he's doing that with this guy, Mr. Gog. So, who is this prince, Gog? Well, most, not all, are going to tell me it's Russia. For what this is worth, on a side note, I went back and took a look at the notes of a gentleman I'd studied with 45 or so years ago, Dr. McGee. I like him a lot because he's a great theologian and he speaks in language that the regular guy like me can understand. And he builds a really interesting case that this is Russia from looking at these biblical names like Rosh, Meshach, and Tubal and how they correspond to modern day names. Kind of interesting how he does that. He also points out that this entity, Gog, is going to have a very, very strong attraction to what is offered in the Middle East. First, oil. In wartime, not much is going to be more valuable than oil, and there is a phenomenal amount of oil available around Israel in the Middle East. Second, Russia has long desired a warm water port where they could launch out into the waterways of the sea with the convenience of warm water. And the Mediterranean offers a perfect opportunity to do that right beside Israel. And a third reason, this is really kind of interesting, the minerals in the Dead Sea are tremendously alkaline, and they are absolutely just abounding with minerals that can replenish dead soil through over-harvesting soil and through likely wartime. Soil gets so abused. And what is in there, here's a list of things if there's a scientist listening. Potassium chloride, magnesium chloride, sodium chloride, calcium, cerium, cobalt, manganese, and even gold. So there is a tremendous treasure in the Dead Sea to be able to replenish soil during wartime. So all of these things, the minerals of the Dead Sea, the oil supply in the region, the opportunity to have and enjoy a warm water port, this is going to be extremely attractive for Russia, if in fact Russia is this entity. And those are things that God may use to make it absolutely essential and irresistible to invade the land of Israel. Now, when is this great war going to happen, where this entity Gog of the land of Magog gathers together all of his troops and a great many troops of the surrounding nations, those who are serving him, and he brings them in to assault Israel? When's that going to happen? This is when it gets a little bit difficult. Now, Mr. Gog here's some words he said. Let me see, it's from Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 11. This is what Gog says with his intention to invade Israel. 38:11, I will go up against the land of unwalled villages. I will go up against those who are at rest, that live security, all of them living without walls and having no bars or gates. So you're looking at a time when Israel is dwelling in extreme peace. There's no need for bars or gates or anything like that. They're living on their land. So there are two times coming up when I can see Israel living securely. And these two times are the two that I would look at personally, where we may see the fulfillment of Ezekiel chapter 38 and Ezekiel chapter 39. First, during the first half of the tribulation period, we're taught that, there's no conflict at all and everything's lovely. Well, there's going to be a little conflict, but it's very, very likely Israel itself can be experiencing peace during that time. So they've perhaps got their temple built. Some have suggested that Antichrist himself will help build the temple to appease the Jew, who will be a potential thorn in his side. So they got this temple up, everything's lovely, and he has made a firm covenant with the many, indicating that the Antichrist is going to greenlight Israelite worship. He's good to go with that. So during this time, this is one of the two times when Israel's going to be safe and feel safe, which matches the dialogue that Mr. Gog says from Ezekiel chapter 38 and verse 11. So there's peace going on, or at least Israel feeling secure, some sense of security during the first half of the tribulation period. But again, not all is peaceful. Do you remember that as the Antichrist, as he ascends to the temple of God and there takes his seat and displays himself as being God at the midpoint of the tribulation period, the Antichrist has killed at this point God's two witnesses, and he has suffered a wound from which he has risen from the dead. Remember that? The beast that had the wound of the sword and has come to life? See, evil has a theory here. through a false trinity that puts forth the Antichrist, and through a false resurrection, it now takes its seat in the temple of God, displaying itself as being God. So how does the Antichrist suffer this fatal wound? Scripture's not clear, but it could possibly be here the conflict of Ezekiel 38 and 39, that through this conflict, the Antichrist has lost his life. That's possibility one. We've seen from the Antichrist's, from Mr. Gog's own words, that this is a time of peace and tranquility. So that's the first time where, we can see that there's an opening there for Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39. Now, it may also happen at the last part of the tribulation, although this is a little bit harder for me to believe, because Israel's not going to be at peace in the last half of the tribulation. However, when we went over Daniel chapter 11, which contains a lot of the details of the conflict of the last 3.5 years of the tribulation period, just before the Antichrist meets his end, it says that rumors from the east and from the north disturb him, and he'll go forth with great wrath to annihilate many. That could be China and could be Russia. The northwest tip of Russia is straight over Israel. That could be the time of Ezekiel 38 and 39. Minds that are much greater than mine have suggested that as a possibility. But what I see is that Israel won't be at peace during that time. There is yet a third possibility where it looks that there might be a window for Ezekiel chapter 38 and Ezekiel chapter 39 to be fulfilled. Israel will be at peace and at rest during the millennial reign of Christ. This is a 1,000-year period that we'll get into later that occurs after the 7-year tribulation. After the 7-year tribulation, at this point, the beast, which is the Antichrist, and the false prophet, the third member of the Trinity, they're cast into the lake of fire. Satan himself is not. He is bound for 1,000 years. Christ comes down at this point to personally reign over his people for 1,000 years. And then at the end of this 1,000 years, man decides, without the evil influence of the evil Trinity, man still makes a decision that he doesn't want God, and there's another war. If you will check out Revelation chapter 20, verse 8, this war is, you get some details on it there, and you'll see that these areas, Gog and Magog, are mentioned even there. So it may be possible, with a tremendous amount of security that Israel is experiencing during the millennial reign of Christ. He gathers them into their territory. There is a millennial temple that Ezekiel writes about in Ezekiel 40 to 48, where Old Testament worship is put on display for all to see. But Israel is feeling such rest during that time and security, that may be an opportunity for the fulfillment of Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39. And that may be the destruction of Gog may have to do with mankind's final decision to go to war against God without the influence of Satan or the Antichrist or the false prophet. So I'm sorry that I can't be more specific about, a time when Ezekiel 38 and 39 might be fulfilled. I've noticed that scholars who are much, much more informed than I am, and these guys that I really respect a lot, even they're not 100% in agreement, and none of them are really dogmatic. we're all kind of guessing. And I think some of this stuff God has just left us a little bit unclear on. He doesn't want us to be able to figure out chronologically every single detail that's coming. He wants us to, I think, study it, learn it, and view it from different perspectives from different prophetic writers, so we can just put it together as best we can and walk by faith. So I wish I had more to give you on that. That's the best I can do with it. We'll speak a brief word about the millennial temple, Ezekiel chapter 40 to 48, and then we'll head back over to Daniel. See you over there.